Welcome to the Women in Vinyl podcast with Jenn DiEugenio, founder of Women in Vinyl and contributor Robyn Raymond. This podcast facilitates conversations with those working in the vinyl record industry to educate, demystify, and diversify the vinyl community.
To Dark Time for giving us their song this week, Radiation, off of their brand new record. One of the bands from hometown Calgary. Thank you. And also brand new microphones on the podcast. We want to say a big thank you to Peluso Microphone Lab for these spanky PS1s. Thank you, Peluso. Check them out, pelusomicrophonelab.com. And also on the Instagrams and the Twitters.
Thank you for joining the Women in Vinyl podcast. Today is our first ever Tech Talk, and we are going to be talking about Vinyl 101. I think an interesting way to get this started would be for you to grab a record if you have one nearby. And we're going to create some baseline terminology, knowledge, go through every part of the record in your hand and describe a little more about it.
Yeah, and please only grab a record if you're safe to do so. Don't do this if you're driving. Don't. Even if you have one of the shiny new Lexus cars that has a turntable in it, don't take the 7-inch out of the dashboard and look at it while you're driving. Please be safe.
You can just listen
disclaimer.
to the episode twice.
Yeah, disclaimer, we want you to be safe all of the time. Thank you.
So if you do have a record nearby, or if you just know your records in and out like some of us do, if you're looking at the record, you'll see the shiny part at the very beginning that doesn't have any music on it. So that is called the lead-in groove. Robyn, why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Okay, so the lead-in groove is on the very outside of the record. Whether you're looking at any of the different sizes, you're going to look at the very, very outside. You might see it, that it's a little shinier, and you might see lines that are farther apart than where the music starts, which is a little bit farther into the record. So the lead-in groove is a blank spiraling groove. Sometimes we call it a silent groove that goes from the outside, and it allows us to start cutting the record. So it's where we drop the cutting stylus into whatever medium we're cutting the master, and allows us to kind of like calibrate the weight of the cutting stylus too, before we start the music part of the record, which allows us to eliminate wow and flutter and make sure that we have the proper spacing and groove depth, adhering to the RIAA curve sometimes when you are cutting a lacquer or a copper disc. Not so much when you're doing a lathe cut.
And for those that don't know, what is wow and flutter?
So wow and flutter are two things that kind of make record collectors crazy, and for good reason. So they're both audible. Wow is kind of like a pitch variation. Sometimes that's because either the cutter head or your playback stylus is too heavy and it's actually like dragging on the record and slowing it down. And then flutter is kind of opposite, where it just like makes the record sound like cracked or like ugly, staticky sounding. And the record actually kind of like moves on the turntable. And RIAA is the Recording Industry Association of America, and they like to give us guidelines so that everything kind of adheres to the same standards so that people can calibrate their turntables. Record pressing things happen more efficiently because all of the math makes sense and everybody has access to the same equations, if that makes sense too.
Future episode to come.
Indeed.
And then after the lead and groove, we go into the actual tracks. And something that I get questions about a lot in my job in sales are the visual markers. And so building that space in between your tracks so the cutting engineer can put those visual markers so the listener has a place to drop their needle, essentially, to be able to find where the different tracks are.
Yeah, sometimes we call them indexes. Sometimes they're called extra silent grooves or delineations. Sometimes you do them by hand like I do, or you can do them automatically. I just did a bunch of records today where they didn't want any indexes at all. So it's just like back to back, lead in to run out, one whole track, which is pretty cool.
And that's why when you're making a record too, when you're submitting your tracklist audio, it's important to give those times for the cutter to know, where those go. Because in some cases, like you just mentioned, they don't want any.
Yeah.
And so when you're making those indexes, how are you doing that when you're cutting?
So when I cut a record, I have what's called a feed screw, and I hand advance the feed screw and the cutting stylus faster than the record is spinning. So it just kind of like widens the land in between the grooves and allows for a blank spot to go in between. When you're cutting on like a VMS 70 or an 80, they have a button that they press instead, which is much fancier because computers, even though those computers are from the 50s, which makes them cooler. So that's how I do it. Yeah, sometimes it's automated and sometimes not. Did you want to talk about the run-out groove and the lock groove, Jen?
Yeah, so after you've finished your side, typically there is a locked groove, and that is a place where your needle will stop so that it doesn't run out into the label. I've had records, though, that locked groove wasn't so locked and it will still skate. But theoretically, it should stop in the lockout groove. And you can also have a locked groove, and you can have those throughout the record, right? So if you want to have a hidden track, for example, Robyn could cut that at a different point in the record. And then as the listener, you'd have to pick up the needle to skip over that locked groove into the next track. Something interesting I ran into early on was an endless loop within a locked groove. And that was fun.
They're so tricky, too. They're so tricky. It's so hard to cue the audio to make it, to like figure out where the good part is to be able to like make it continuous, because sometimes, as we all know in music, there's like deviations and things. And so you want to find the like natural point where it's like, oh, this is going to sound like it. No, it keeps going, instead of, oh, this is sounding, oh, and it goes again.
Yeah. And it can be how many seconds?
Oh, I mean, it kind of depends on where you're putting it on the record. Like the start and the finish point of a 12-inch, like you might have one of those, like a loop at like 12 minutes if they're doing it like an EP. Or it could be potentially 4 seconds if you're right at max at the label. So, I mean, it kind of depends on, and the speed that you're making the recording at too. So.
Yeah. I see a lot of people do them at the end of the record, and it will be things like waves crashing or birds chirping or things like that, where, you know, the listener's sitting there for a minute and they're like, why is this not stopping?
Yeah. It's like the terrible nightmare that you have when you're like, you fall asleep to Netflix and then there's like whatever that noise is. And then you just like, you hear it in your dreams. And then, oh, or maybe I'm dating myself, but there used to be a test pattern on television and it used to be like, me. And then you would wake up to a bunch of color bars and not know where you were.
Yep.
Yeah. I pretty much do a lock groove for every ending of a record. I mean, sometimes, again, people ask you to just like run it out. I did a record last year where one side was a run out and the other side was lock groove. That was kind of confusing. And so you have to I have to watch for the rotation, and I have a mark on the middle of my turntable, and I count when it goes to 2.5, and that's where I need to pick up my cutting stylus. Otherwise, it'll start like recutting over where it was, and you want them to just line up so that the playback stylus tracks properly. Otherwise, you get this like horrific scratching noise that nobody wants to listen to. I mean, that'll make you run across your living room really quickly. But it's, again, it's different with like lacquer cutters and DMM, but that's how I do it. So.
And just briefly, because that's a whole other episode, a lacquer versus DMM, and DMM means direct metal mastering.
Sure does.
So, briefly.
So, there's lacquer, there's direct metal, and then there's lathe cutting. Technically, it's all the same process, just different mediums. So, when I cut records, I cut directly into a plastic medium. Lacquer is this beautifully flammable product that's made out of nitrocellulose, which is gun cotton, and like a shellac lacquer, kind of like nail polish, and that's all smooshed together. And it's coated over an aluminum disc. Lacquer cutters cut with a sapphire or a ruby. And then direct metal mastering cuts right into like a copper base, which is just like a copper disc without the lacquer on top of it. And so it's, I believe, is a diamond or a sapphire as well. And they do the same exact process. So it's just takes out one of the next steps in production.
Right. And so if we're going back to the record that you're checking out, after we get past that last groove, we have what's called dead wax. So that's just the extra space between your label and that last groove. And the dead wax is a fun place for your matrix, catalog number. Like, this could be just an identifier. So, you know, like if Women in Vinyl became a label, maybe our catalog number would be something like WIV001 for our first one, or 02, or whatever. Could be any numbers, letter combo.
And sometimes there'll also be an A or a B after that catalog number. If it was a recut, which it means that the test pressing was refused, and they had to recut the lacquer or the DMM, then they'll put like a -1 or 2, however many revisions they have to do in order to make it sound good. And then sometimes also in that section, there'll be a stamp for the studio, the mastering studio where it was done, or initials of whoever cut it. Sometimes there can also be like a cheeky message from the band. Today I cut a bunch of messages into records that is a little nerve-wracking, because you've just cut this beautiful side and now you have to articulately put in a phrase in teeny tiny little space and make sure that it's legible and spelled right. Yeah.
I think two things. Like, one, the A and B is super important, because not everybody puts A and B on their labels. So, and a lot of times, not all pressing plants put A and B on their test pressing labels either.
True.
So I've run into people that took a long time to approve their test pressings because they didn't know to look in the dead wax to find that A and B.
Yes.
So if someone didn't put A or B on their labels, that's a good way to make sure you're following a track list on a jacket. All of that is usually scribed at the lacquer stage. So when you're not doing lathe cutting like Robyn does, when you're at the lacquer stage, that's when all of that would be scribed.
Yeah, and then it gets plated too, so then you don't have to do every single record like I do. So it's much easier. You just have to get it right once. But sometimes you'll see where maybe the mastering engineer has made a mistake and then they scratch something out, and then they'll put a revision number beside, or a correction or something too. So
right, because if you have to do it at the metal phase, then you have to write backwards.
Yes, which is I mean, when you're looking at stampers, and I know that this is jumping ahead a little bit, when I was looking at stampers, I was like, okay, what? And you got to flip your brain, because you're reading backwards and upside down sometimes too. So, And it's not always AB. Sometimes it's CD. Sometimes it's EF. Sometimes it's GH. So, or 1, 2, 3, 4. So,
yeah.
Or Ozzy did that record, that picture disc, and it was this and that, or this side and other, which was also super confusing too.
And as far as like custom messages, I know I have a few Iron Maiden records that have some fun stuff in the dead wax etch. So definitely look there. But some bands put some fun stuff in there, and we got a lot of questions as far as when we put this out on social media to sort of see what people wanted to know. We got a lot of questions about matrix etchings and what those all mean, and in some of my Black Sabbath research, it is crazy to sort of see how you can track down different plants, different cutters, different releases just through that. It's like secret code for collectors.
And for everybody that has Instagram, there's a really great Instagram account that I'm homies with, which is Dead Wax Scrolls. And that's all he does for his Instagram, is shows you what's in the dead wax and like what it means. And he sent me a photo and he was like, "What is this? What is this? Help me." And so we did some sleuthing and it was really fun. So shout out to Dead Wax Scrolls, because that dude rules.
And for anyone that is using Discogs to catalog, that is a good way to figure out what those mean or what pressing you have. A lot of times you'll mistake a pressing, or there will be different releases that aren't necessarily a different color vinyl or something like that. And so that's a good way to find out which one you have if you're looking at, do I have a first press or whatever.
Yeah, and the catalog number doesn't always indicate a color either. So that sometimes won't be exactly helpful. If you're looking for a color variant, you're not going to find a different catalog number because it's the same stamper. So there's that.
We've sort of touched on lacquers and we've mentioned stampers a couple times. So basically, your audio is cut to the lacquer, and then the lacquer goes into plating, which is like a nickel bath that creates metal. Essentially, it creates your metal master. There's 3-step plating and 2-step plating, and again, that's for a totally different episode. But essentially, from that, you get a stamper. It's created from your master, and then that stamper is what is used to then press your records. So it is inserted into the machine. It's formed to the different presses, and then that's what goes into the machine to press your vinyl.
Yeah, they're shiny and beautiful. We love them. We'll talk about them way more, but not today. Yeah.
And so, catalog numbers go back to early 20th century, around the same time as 10-inch shellac records. And so let's briefly touch on that as we get into what our records are made out of.
Yeah. Awesome. So shellac is, incredible. And it goes all the way back to the 1800s. In 1895-ish, turn of the century, shellac-based material was introduced, and it became kind of the standard. Formulas varied by manufacturer. It was kind of agreed upon with all of them that resin, which is made by female lac bugs.
Sorry, vegans.
Don't know, because they secrete it and onto trees, and then people would scrape it. So they didn't grind them up. It's all good.
Good. Not like cochineal.
No, exactly. And whatever the red pigment is.
Yeah.
But yeah, so they would scrape it off a tree and then dissolve that into alcohol. And then it was mixed with a bunch of other things. Like mineral filler, which is like slate, limestone. Those 78s, if you have any in your collection and you're playing them on a gramophone, bless you. But that's why they sound kind of scratchy and weird, because they're kind of made out of rocks. And they also have cotton fiber and carbon black for color, because they started to get really gray and ashy and kind of weird. And then a little bit of wax or lubricant, so that they could create the actual medium and cut the grooves into the record.
Right. And then the next evolution was sort of into the acetate, which is more of what we're used to now. It was 78. Sometimes you can find them at estate sales. I'm trying to think where else you would find 78, but they look like a 10-inch. They're a little heavier. Can you think of somewhere else where you would pick up a 78 these days?
I mean, old radio stations have some sometimes. Obviously, museums. Yeah, they're not very common anymore because they're so fragile and they break really easily. So not a lot of people. I mean, I probably have 50 or 75 in my own collection still that were handed down from my grandpa. So I have a bunch, and we can show them on a YouTube eventually.
Yeah, I have some at my mom's house too. And actually, shout out to the Vinyl Guide, who did a really interesting episode on some really expensive and rare 78s out there. I think there were some blues things that were pretty crazy.
Oh, I bet. Yeah. Acetates are still used in day-to-day too. We use them as reference discs. So it's kind of like the pre-version of a test pressing. So at some mastering facilities, people ask for an acetate, and so we'll give you kind of a lacquer cut of what is going to be cut into your lacquer and then eventually turned into a test pressing so that you can make sure that the cut is good. So it's kind of like a good second check, but they're so fragile that you can't play them a lot up because they'll degrade. So we still kind of use them, but not a lot.
How many plays do you typically get off of one?
I mean, that also depends on how mean you are to your records, I find. If you're getting a reference acetate, you probably, can play it comfortably like 10 or 15 times with like a regular weighted playback system. If you're maybe a less than ideal playback setting, then it might be a little bit rougher on that poor little acetate. So you'll get less mileage out of it.
And so that leads us then to back to the record.
We are now. Yeah. Jen, what do you see every day?
PVC.
Everywhere. Yes. Giant gaylords of PVC pellets.
And so that is polyvinyl chloride. And yes, for record pressing, it comes in pellet form. It comes in black, various colors. Different plants carry different colors. And you can mix these pellets to create other colors. Mm-hmm. Though I have found, coming from a design background, everything you know is not true when you're mixing PVC. So what you think is not always the outcome.
How hard is it to match Pantone in PVC?
It's not easy.
No.
Yeah, no. The pressing room definitely needs to spend some time on it. I mean, it's plus every time you change a color, you have to empty the hopper, clean out, and that's the hopper is where you put the PVC in the machine. Mm-hmm. So you have to clean that out every time, try to get all the remnants out before you then press the next color. So if you're trying to match a Pantone, you have to completely clear that out. And then it's just different variables. Do I put a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and what percentage of this and that, pellet-wise and color-wise, to make that Pantone?
Yeah. I mean, bless the people that are doing that work, because everybody loves those colored records.
Yeah.
Oh.
And it's a big debate. It's a debate that we can sort of touch on now.
Hotly contested on the internet. Some people love colored records. Some people cut colored records and then want to cut themselves because they're cutting colored records.
I was very surprised at how even the split was, though. It was like almost 50% black, 50% color. I mean, it was like 52 to 48.
Yeah.
So black won out, which is surprising to me because of how much color I see in the market and how much color we press.
Is it like a completion thing? Do they want just like all of the things? Is it like they want to get the black one to listen to and then they want the other 3 colors or 4 colors, or in Taylor Swift's case, like 9 other colors for that one record, which was crazy. My God. Or is it, are they actually listening to them? Right. Is it just like to have, or is it, the fidelity sound debate, I find, is always a little bit hotly contested, because sometimes, they're listening to the colors and sometimes they're not listening to the colors. So they don't know. They just love the color.
Right. What we heard from a lot of people was that they feel like the color is, built-in collectability. Gimmick was used, but I don't know that I would call it gimmicky, but I think it sort of creates that exclusive component for different distributors, different countries even, band exclusives. There's a lot of reasons why people will do different colors.
Yeah, absolutely. I get asked to do colored records all the time. So in lathe world, we get black and clear very easily, and those are a plastic called PETG. Is also what face shields are made out of.
Interesting.
So that created a little bit of a hiccup for some people the last couple of years, because face shields arguably maybe a little bit more important than lathe cutting for some people, but not for me. So I was able to get lots of records. Hooray. And then our colored records are polycarbonate, and polycarbonate is a harder plastic. The way that like lathe records are made is kind of like an Oreo. Can I say that because we're not sponsored by Oreo? They're kind of like
like a sandwich cookie.
Yeah, like a sandwich cookie that is not going to be named. That has 2 clear layers, and then it's got a colored layer in between, and then they're all like kind of melted and formed together. So you cut, when we're lathe cutting, we cut just the colored, or like the clear top coat and bottom coat, even if it's a black record. So our what we call swarf or chip, which is like the actual part that comes off the record, like your groove, I could string out that swarf and like put a needle across it and actually play your record, which would be weird, but that all comes off clear, unless you have your cutter head too heavy and you start to cut into the middle of the record. And then, because your swarf starts coming off black and you're like, stop immediately, because you're going to like go through that cookie really quickly and bad things are going to happen.
And that's sort of the difference between lathe cutting and then pressing, is that Robyn's cutting, like she's saying, right into the sandwich cookie, whereas in pressing, we're using these pellets and we're heating them and using steam and pressure to create a puck that then goes in between your stampers and squashes that puck to make your record.
Yeah.
So
going back to stampers for a hot minute, it's the negative of what the lacquer is. So when you're plating it, when it goes to plating it, all those little metal molecules go into the grooves, and they grow a tiny little negative of the record. So then you actually like pull them apart, and so you've got a positive and a negative, which is pretty cool. So you can actually see the negative impression of your record. So if you flipped them over, you could put them together again like a cookie, but one groove would fit into the other groove, and so that's why pressing works, because they're a negative impression. So that puck actually smooshes out over top all of those grooves and mountains and smooths out because of steam.
Yeah, we have some cool pictures and videos and things of this that we can share as well. We'll get them up for everybody to check out.
Yeah.
I think the other, thing with color is sound quality. I think there's a lot of questions on, if it's color vinyl, is the quality bad? What are your thoughts?
From my limited experience in a QC department, I found that effects cause more trouble in Fidelity Land than color does. So that's the splatter, that's the color in color, that's the 3-color, whether you call it a tri-color, whether it's a pizza, whether it's a Neapolitan ice cream bar. There's so many different phrases for those. But then you have super geniuses like Wax Mage, Ho Baby. Those records are bitchin'. They sound amazing and they look incredible. And for those of you that follow along again on Instagram, Wax Mage, yo. Yeah. Those are incredible.
And to go back to, some of those effects like splatter and color and half and half and all the different things that you see. So those are hand press. So basically what happens is you take your puck, you take your pellets and you put them in the hopper and you heat them up and you create a puck. And then based on the effect that you're trying to get, you manipulate that puck. So if it's splatter vinyl, you're sticking the puck into pellets like sprinkles on a donut.
It's
and then
the cutest donut you'll ever see.
Yeah, exactly. And then you're putting that in between the stampers with labels on either side, and you're pressing the record.
Yeah.
If you're doing a half and half record or a color and color, there's different plants do them different ways, but essentially you're cutting up those colored pucks, putting them back together, and then putting them into the machine. So that's why, understandably, those could have less quality, because it's not that single puck extruded. It's pieces of pucks that are put together to make those cool patterns.
Yeah, and you're working against time, because you actually need to worry about how hot and or cold the puck and the sprinkles are too, because those can all behave differently. Yep. And sometimes you're dealing with virgin PVC, and sometimes you're dealing with something we call regrind. And regrind is usually only from solid color records. And then you pop the label part out, and you take whatever defective record that you're not happy with, and you throw it into a place where you can smash them all up, and then you grind them in a huge Vitamix, and then you take that and you can either melt them into pellets again, or you can just throw them into a sprinkle machine again too. So those kind of things will have impact on fidelity as well. Sometimes regrind sounds better if you're doing just black regrind or clear regrind, because the secret that no record pressing plant wants you to hear is that all PVC is actually clear. Oh, bing, boom, bomb. And then they add carbon black to make it a little bit more stable. And that's why people think that black records sound better, but they're actually clear records with a little bit of sauce on them.
Right. And I think too, there's, as far as regrind goes, I think there's also a misconception that it's like that bad records means like we got a bunch of records from Goodwill that no one bought and we reground them, or that they have label pieces in them or whatever, which is actually not the case. It could just be that records didn't pass quality control because of some random thing, like a defect on the stamper. And so the vinyl, while it's been pressed, hasn't been played necessarily. So it doesn't mean that your record is going to be inferior if it was regrind. I've heard people doing things with eco vinyl because it's recycled in a way by using regrind. So I think that's sort of interesting to think about. But yeah, and as far as the whole color debate, for me, I think I noticed the most issue with glow and with white.
Yeah.
But I think, different PVC at different plants is different in machines. So some colors might press easier at one plant than at another plant. I don't think it necessarily means that it's going to be bad because it's color. But like colors like white or clear are also harder to quality control. It's harder to see, stitching or non-fill, which are pressing flaws that can happen.
Another episode to come. Don't worry. We'll do it. We'll take all of your issues and we'll boil them down into one episode about what QC and QA actually means.
Right.
And we'll tell you all of those insider terms so that you can actually Discogs the shit out of your records and be like, oh yeah, no, it's got this and this and this and this and this and this all over it. Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think, glow for me is the worst though. I mean, I have a glow record that I got on a record store day. And I mean, I went out and I bought the black. I was like, I can't. Mm-hmm. It sounded so bad. So
yeah, I mean, it really just kind of depends on the people that are pressing the record, where that PVC is coming from, whether it's the first off the stamper or the 500th off the stamper too. So there's so many things that can affect sound quality. Color is one of the things, but it's not the only thing. So
right. If there's a cool pressing you want and it's a color,
get it.
Get it. It's about the music, right?
Get it. Love it.
Yeah.
Get it and love it. And then, buy a black one just for funsies, just to have a backup. some ridiculous double super mega variant completionist marathons that I've gone on, I have decided in my brain that I need to get all of the available variants of the City and Color Pill for Loneliness record. It's a double LP. It is probably my favorite Dallas Green record of all time. And there's a black one, which I have. There is, I mean, it's a double LP too, so there's 2 black ones, so that's even better. And then there's a crazy splatter. It's probably one of the most beautiful records that I've ever seen, so I needed to get it. It's like a purple berry with like orange, blue, gray splatter through it. And then the other one is like a orange primarily, and then it's got a splatter to it too. Then there's a clear with orange color and color, and then there's a clear with blue color and color, and then there is a black icy one that's kind of like a gray black smoke, and then the pair for that one is like a blue icy one. So I have 3 of the 4 of those, and I'm trying to get the last one.
Well,
I went all the way to Amoeba Hollywood to get the black one because I thought you could only get the color variant there, and I wound up just getting a black one. And I was like, oh, well, that's fine. I still got it on vacation, so that's great. I'm sure you have some crazy ones, hey, Jen?
Yeah. And I was going to say, we'll also share some pictures of what we're talking about as far as like color and half, because I know that those aren't always the same terms across different plants. And I also just wanted to mention, too, that the reason why they're usually more exclusive is I mentioned that they were hand pressed, and that's like they're literally made one at a time by hand. So that's why.
It's the closest they get to being a lathe cutter.
So please be patient with your pressing plant.
Yeah, be patient.
You know, as far as different colors and things, I really like what's sometimes called A-side, B-side, where the color sort of like merges on both sides. I think those turn out really cool. I mean, my crazy collection side of things is my Black Sabbath, and those are all black vinyl. Mm-hmm. But I can definitely tell you that the quality within those 40 plus versions of Master Reality is very different, which is sort of, you know, part of what got me on this journey of discovery was, you know, Japanese vinyl, for example, at the time that these were coming out, Japan wasn't having the same sort of wartime issues and things that we were. Mm-hmm. So their vinyl was extremely pure and clean, and the sound quality on that record is amazing. That and like the US promo are really great, clear pressings. Mm-hmm. Whereas some of the other ones you'll find, you know, like there's some Russian pressings.
Those are my favorite to get.
Yeah. Yeah. Or like the Mexican, South American ones, like the quality just isn't as good. Right. And so kind of uncovering all of that is really interesting. And that's just within black vinyl. So you can't even really just say one's better than the other, black versus color, because again, so much depends on the output.
Totally.
I like that a lot of people said that they like black vinyl because they DJ and they need to see the grooves. That makes sense.
Yeah, that's what the little pop-up lights are for.
Turntable 101 to come.
Boop-bop. Yeah, totally. So from some of our Instagram people, Vincent Benicio said, color when I can because it's beautiful. Katie Cortez said, sounds the same and looks pretty. These were all the votes for why they like color records. Lucifer 23 said, only when it matches the jacket art.
I'm a sucker for that.
It's
I will
true.
Say.
A fully realized packaging concept is a beautiful thing when it's executed well.
Yeah, the former designer in me will get behind that. I will choose a pressing based on that, I have to say.
Totally. Our Patreon, our one and only Patreon supporter, get on it while it's fresh, kids. Trailer Thrash Vinyl says, I guess I'm a variant collector? ? But I always get black too, or if it's the only option available. I'm with you on that one for sure. I love to have a backup copy as a black one. As we've discussed before, I don't believe in sealed records, so I'm not going to be the one that like doesn't play a color, but I always have a black one just because.
And Ghostface Kellen mentioned it's always a nice surprise. That is fun when you don't know. When you just pick something up, you go home, you open it, and surprise.
Yeah, like when you're at Amoeba Hollywood and you think that you're going to get this beautiful splatter record and you open up in your hotel room and it's black and you're like, yeah, okay, that's great. I love this anyway. Now our votes for black were David PLDN says, yes, I'm a traditionalist. That's fair. Ms. Rowdy says, yeah, I DJ and I like to see the grooves. DJ Nico from Toronto.
She's awesome.
Hometown girl says quality, which, yes, absolutely. Lady Tron 666 says like 180 gram, which we're getting to. Don't worry. Colored vinyl just feels like a collector's scalper gimmick. I just want it to sound good. Coming with the heat. Lady Tron, don't hold back. I like this. You keep coming. Tell me more. Who else? Circular Music says I seem to have more sound quality issues with colors and variants. So, I mean, that's true. Again, as we've talked about. Let's move to the middle of the record and talk about labels.
Center labels. So
again, with like the pressing, like it can be a nice center point. It can be a beautiful addition to packaging and like a fully realized concept.
And I think the biggest question that I often get, and this is where we can kind of talk about pressing and cutting again, is a lot of people refer to their center labels when they're talking to me at a pressing facility as their stickers. And when you're talking about record pressing, your center labels are not stickers. So they're actually printed on paper, and then that paper has to be heat treated. We bake them in an oven, and that removes all the moisture from those labels. And if you don't do that, and then you put them in the press, when the cup that holds the labels drops a label onto the puck, when that's pressed, if it's not, if the moisture isn't removed, it will actually explode in the press.
It's cool.
It creates a really cool effect.
However, shattered label all the way through the vinyl. Terrible for sound quality.
It's really cool, but you don't want it.
Looks great, sounds bad.
Yeah, that's a framing piece only. But
for sure. But they don't make them out of the plant very often.
No, they should not. They should not. Someone else recently just asked me too about a Black Sabbath record they had, and there was the label looked bubbled. And so sometimes what can happen is when that cup releases the label, it can release two at a time, and then that can create a double label. So there's probably underneath there a perfectly fine label, but the one on top is sort of bubbly because it was a double label. Most of the time those don't make it out of plants either, but sometimes they do. And so that's all that was. But then, Robyn, in your world, it's different.
Yeah, they're totally stickers, baby. Oh, man. Talk to me about variations. Oh, baby. I can make all kinds. It's one of the most infuriating parts of the job, but it's also like part of the cool part because we can do a lot more with lathe cuts with labels, like holographic ones. We can make mirror glitter labels like I just did for the Church of Flag record from Haley and the Crushers. It sold out in 25 hours. Thank you.
Nice. Great song.
Yeah, totally. Thank you, Haley. We love you. And then sometimes I've worked with artists that don't want to do labels at all. So labels, for those of you that don't know what we're talking about, are generally on the center of the record. Sometimes they will indicate a track list, a side, a studio, an actual record label, and that's where labels get their name from. So RCA, Columbia, Network, Universal, Sony, Retta Records from Montreal. I mean, that's kind of the identifier of who is putting out the record. It can be who is on the record. Michael Jackson, Black Sabbath, Minor Threat. It can tell whether it's a test pressing, whether it's coming from Dynalone Records, whether it is side A, side B, side C, side D. whether you should play it at 33 and a third or 45
that's a good one.
RPM.
Yep.
It's helpful information.
It's definitely helpful information. I've had things that don't say that, and I'm like, this sounds strange.
Yes. I've gone down that road myself, and I was like, wow, this is a real departure for this band. And then I was like, wait a minute, nope, wrong speed.
Right. Yeah. I'm like, this stoner rock record sounds very happy right now.
Or the opposite. You're listening to, a pop record, and you're like, wow, they're really sad. Why? Sidebar for anybody that hasn't, if you play Jolene by Dolly Parton at the wrong speed, she sounds almost exactly like Johnny Cash, and it's awesome.
It's amazing. Please go do that.
Or just look on the YouTubes and you can find it.
Yeah. I mean, I heart Dolly, but
Dolly forever.
I mean,
Dolly
that sounds
saved the
great.
world.
Yeah.
But yeah, so labels are very important. Sometimes they have little to no information. I just did plain blue labels with no information, no speed, no side, no nothing for a band last week. So, I mean, it's all part of your concept, bro. You can make it whatever you want. You can make them small. You can make them large. Is this where we start to talk about the size of a record? Whether that is a 7-inch, a 10-inch, or a 12-inch. Sometimes there's a 10. Sometimes there's 12. Sometimes there's 14. What are all those sizes for, Jen?
We do 7-inch and 12-inch at Furnace. Mm-hmm. Don't do 10-inch in-house, but we work with Palace in Germany, and they do 10-inch there. I don't find many people order 10-inch. I also, when I've asked about this online as well, found that a lot of people actually won't buy releases that are 10-inch. I don't personally have an opinion one way or the other. I mean, if I want it and it's 10-inch, I'll buy it. But I think that they tend to sort of be they get left out, I think, in the collection. Because it's like, where do I put them?
They are an odd size. And that's why I love them even more. I just got a bitchin' 10-inch record that I am super excited to receive in the post from the mighty August Burns Red.
Nice.
I'm so excited. I love you guys so much if you're listening.
So why do we have these sizes?
Well, originally, the 78s were all 10 inches, and you could fit maybe one song on them at 78 RPM. For those of you playing along at home, the 3 speeds that we have for records generally now are 78, 45, and 33. The mighty Columbia came out with a 12-inch record in 1948, and they decided that, hey, let's have 20 minutes of uninterrupted music where nobody has to do anything, and you don't have to flip it
the long
to be able
play.
to hear another song. I mean, back in those days, Columbia and RCA were having like a war, essentially. And RCA was like, oh, yeah, well, we're going to make our own record. And so they were like, we're going to make a tiny record that you can put one song on one side and one song on the other side. And those were 45s. Those came out in 1949. And they had big holes in them originally. So those were like your jukebox kind of records. They were 7 inches wide. They were played at 45. And originally they had teeny tiny holes, but they found out that it was creating, again, going back to what we began with, they were creating too much wow and flutter and stress on those records. So it was actually distorting the way that the playback was. So your favorite song would be totally different and your record would be worn out because of playing a tiny hole record. So RCA actually created a record player with a 1.5-inch spindle that was 6 inches high. So you could stack 10 45s and it was automatic. So you would play one and then the tone arm would go beep boop. And then you would have your next record and then it would go beep boop. And you would have an hour of continuous music without having to do anything.
Like those auto CD changers.
Yes. Oh my God. My mom had one of those in the car and it was the best thing ever. It was like, who gets to choose what 6 discs we're listening to today? And I was like, it's all Rolling Stones. I don't care. So, those were a good time. But 45s used to have like a little bit of a lip on them too, so that the grooves wouldn't get smashed by putting record on top of record on top of record as well. I love 7s. I think they're they're one of my favorites. I love buying old
Huge
45s.
part of DJ culture too.
Exactly. It was like you're able to get your new song out right away. And that's what I've been telling a lot of people with lathe cuts too. I'm like, you're in lockdown. You haven't been able to tour. You got a bunch of new music. You don't know, you haven't been able to road test any of these songs. So you don't know what's going to go well together on an album. Let's do a bunch of 7s and see if anybody likes your new song. Because then you can get it out quickly. 14 inches, 20 inches, and 22 inches were way back in gramophone kind of days, so you're not really going to see those very much anymore. Turntables will not accommodate those sizes any longer, unless you heavily modify them. We don't recommend that.
Your lacquer, though, for a 12-inch record will be 14 inches.
Yeah, because you cut it down to be plated.
Yep.
So you use a 12-inch to make a 10 and a 12-inch lacquer to make a 7 as well.
Exactly.
Sometimes you can recycle them too, because you're like, oh, messed up hard on the outside of this one. Now it's a 7. Recycling. And that's good times.
And so if we go back to the record that you potentially pulled to hang with us during this episode, if you flip it over to the other side and there's a pretty picture on it, that is a laser etch. And that is laser cut to have that design. I find that a lot of the time those come out better if they are more bold graphic designs than things that are super intricate, because those are actually also going to become a stamper. So that's actually going to go into the machine and be pressed into the record. The thing, with that too, you'll find is sometimes people want to try to match the art and the label, and there's just no possible way to do that. Like, there's no way that you could line up the etch with the label if you're pressing. The press just spits out the label in whatever direction it's in. So a lot of times you'll see that those are black or blank, or sometimes have no label. So yeah, a laser etch, and it's pressed into the record.
And sometimes it depends on the color that you get. Sometimes etching can look really great on a certain color and look really bad on some other colors.
Sometimes you can't even see it.
That's not something that we do at mastering studios. We don't do etching like in pictures. No chance. That's got to go. That's something that we don't have the mental capacity to do. So that's got to go out and away to other places. Sometimes it's like a CNC place with some nerd that knows how to do AutoCAD way better than me. So I'm happy for them to do it. Let's talk about weights of records now, Jen.
Let's round it out.
Hotly contested.
Let's round it out with 140 gram versus 180 gram.
Oh, baby.
Interestingly, I had someone say that they weren't aware of what 140 gram vinyl was. And so that is, right now, that's your standard typical weight for a record, is 140 gram. Back in the day, like if you get some old 80s records, or when records weren't being pressed as often, like I have some Cramps records that are really light. I mean, maybe 120, maybe. It's just the amount of material. Record pressing wasn't as frequent then, but our standard today is 140 gram. And then 180 gram is your heavier weight. There's a big debate. This is like, it's the it's the color versus black debate of 140
totally
versus
is.
180.
Yeah.
I personally feel like it depends on your market. That's what I tell people if they're trying to decide. If they're a band or a label, I say, who are you appealing to? Because I truthfully feel like the expense to press 180 gram, if that's your market, if you have an audiophile market and they are expecting 180 gram, go for it. But if you're a band putting out your first record, I don't think that you necessarily need to go that route, personally.
You've got to be ready for the expense, because more PVC is going to translate into a price point. So if you're going to press records, you need to know what your budget is going to be, and people will still be stoked on your record, whether it's 140 or 180 gram. You just have to be transparent about it, because there's also some variation at plants. So it might be 150, it might be 160, but it's not going to be any less than 140, but it might be 185.
Right.
So
that's true. I mean, there's always variance.
There's always variation. So, I mean, if you think that you have a 140 gram record, you might be pleasantly surprised if you put it on a scale and see that it's 150. I mean, that's one of the things that people like to tout as like fidelity. I mean, again, it depends on your playback system. It depends on how everything is calibrated, how your tone arm is calibrated, how old your stylus is, all of those things, whether your turntable is a direct drive or a belt drive too. All of those things are going to contribute into playback. You might have a heavier record might just have a little bit better chance of not warping because it's got more stuff to it.
Right.
So
I've heard that the weight causes less vibration on the turntable, and that's why some people prefer it.
You might get less rumble for sure. Deeper grooves is not really a thing because, again, all of these standards from the RIAA, again, the Recording Industry Association of America, govern what you're able to do with cutting these records. So they have to adhere to a certain curve and a certain metric in order to be plated and stampered and all that kind of stuff. So if you have a lathe cut, I like to cut what's called a 2 millimeter thick record, which is technically 180 gram to 185 grams. And I can cut a deeper groove into it because I can manually weight that cutting head. So I can make a really super deep groove, but I don't adhere to the RIAA. I am PR and DIY. So
yeah, I mean, I think that that's one of the biggest misconceptions that I hear. Some things that people say that they find good about 180 gram besides these sort of things is mail. They don't arrive warped or messed up in the mail.
Yeah. And that's the thing. It's just got like a little bit less flex to it. So, maybe your angry post office person is not going to try and bend it and put it into your mailbox.
Right.
I mean,
it's your hefty version. Yeah.
Yes.
I was surprised. The poll came back from our online ask as 27% for 140 gram and 73% for 180 gram.
Ooh.
So I was surprised about that because, again, just what I see day to day, I thought that was an interesting result.
I had to learn what the weight of a 7-inch was so that I could ship them properly, and it is 70 grams. So, I mean, and again, it's a 2 millimeter thick record, so it's kind of like the 180 gram version of a 7-inch record, which is not going to be 180 grams because it's not that big.
Right.
So, I mean, what else do we need to talk about here? We opened the door for picture discs, but I feel like that is a conversation all on its own.
If you picked up a picture disc for this, rewind, grab another one.
Put it down and
we'll
walk
talk about
away.
picture discs another day. We got so many questions about picture discs that, I think it needs to be its own topic.
Totally is.
And at that time, we could talk about shaped records, flexi records.
Oh, yeah. I love a flexi.
But I do want to mention, if you want more on the history of what we were talking about as far as, shellac, acetates, PVC, a really interesting article came out today on Isotope. Mm-hmm. Our other contributor, Jet, who's part of the Women in Vinyl team as well, wrote that, and she is sort of taking vinyl through the decades and how that sound changed and how they were made. So that's a cool read as well.
Yeah. I will say that in the 70s, when disco was just starting to get started, that's when there was like a big conflict in the Middle East. And that's why oil production actually was like halted. And so PVC actually comes from oil. So that's why there was like a shortage. And that's why the vinyl decline started because materials were just simply not there. So you started to get lighter and lighter records, and they started to go back into tricks that they were using back when records started and filling it with slate and stone and things like that. And you would get really scratchy, weird sounding records. And so people really just started to hate the way that records were sounding, and they were too thin, and they warped it in the sun, and they did all of these things. And so bring on the CDs or the tapes.
And I think it's interesting to mention sort of the landscape we're in now. To that point, PVC is typically imported. And so we're in a position now where I just want to say, everybody be patient with your record labels, with your record stores, and with your record pressers. When a ship gets stuck, that affects your records. PVC, with everybody being home and the demand for vinyl and as booked as everybody is right now, it's a crazy landscape to try to press a record right now. So a lot of times when you see delays or things like that, like, don't get angry with your record label or the band.
Don't get angry at the band.
Yeah, please.
Especially. They literally have no control once they've decided to go ahead with vinyl.
And I hope that, I hope this discussion sort of shows, to start, just within that record, how many people are touching it. And we haven't even talked about, cutting and plating, really,
parts.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's so many, it is, as much as we love it and it's pretty and it sounds great, it's manufacturing, right? So at the end of the day, like, it could be a plunger or it could be a record. Like,
it could be a camping chair.
Right? Like, things go, same kind of thing where you're making a thing. There's a lot of variables. So with COVID and the world as it is right now, just be patient.
Everybody at the end of the day just needs a little bit more kindness. And that's like where we're at, right? Like, be nice to your record people all of the time. Be nice to all people, but definitely to record people, because we love what we're doing. We want to do it forever. And we love when you love what we do. So.
Right. And you have so many on your shelf already. Pull something out.
It's true. Go back to the A's, Amanda, and listen to your A records again. How about that?
It's the way to go. Alphabetical listening.
Yeah, exactly. Alphabetical and numerical. I want to give a shout out to Peluso microphones, because we sound amazing.
Yes.
Peluso Microphone Lab, thank you so much. Our first sponsor. Oh my God. You guys, get into it. Give them a follow on Instagram. Check out their website. Also, check out womeninvinyl.com. Obviously, episode 2, History of Vinyl, kinda. And we're going to dive into some more later in the next one.
Yeah, please continue to share this kind of information, even if it's not asked. We would love to hear from you, things you want to know. If you want us to expand more on anything.
Yeah,
media.
Shout out to Scott Wolf for giving us all kinds of notes.
Yes.
Thanks. Appreciate
that. Yep.
Thanks for everybody for contributing and answering polls and things. We appreciate the interaction. Like, share, subscribe, every single platform you could imagine. Give it to your people that you want to get into vinyl. Maybe somebody needs to be a collector and they aren't yet. Here's a good way to get them started.
Totally. Yeah, email us, media@womeninvinyl.com. Also check out the Patreon. Behind the scenes, extra pictures, plating stuff we talked about. Will all live there, and any of the proceeds go to making this a nonprofit. So all to a good cause.
Heck yeah. Also, we're going to be doing a Sound Girls panel. Jen and I will be moderating, and you can sign up there April 11th at 3 p.m. Eastern. We're going to have some incredible humans on that panel answering vinyl questions too. So all the different ways, get in touch. I want to say thank you to Dark Time for letting us use their new amazing song, Radiation. Amazing band from Calgary. Just did a bunch of records for them. Thanks, Kaylee, for letting us use your song today. Thanks, everybody, for joining us for episode 2. We'll see you on the B-side. Thanks, Anna.
This episode has been brought to you by Women in Vinyl, Red Spade Records, and produced by Black Circle Studios. Thank you for listening. Please remember to subscribe, and you can always contact us directly by visiting www.womeninvinyl.com.